The room did not erupt when Prince William made his move. It became completely silent. Queen Camilla had entered expecting another difficult family discussion, but the Prince of Wales carried something far more powerful than an argument. With King Charles seated only feet away, William announced a crown decree that stripped Camilla of influence over succession planning, the Wales children, and decisions concerning the future reign. Charles stared at his son and could not answer. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William held the room with a calm, dangerous as anger. Around him sat Charles, Camilla, Princess Anne, advisors, and the king's private secretary. They had gathered inside Buckingham Palace to settle whether George, Charlotte, and Louis would attend crown ceremonies. They mattered because they would shape how the children understood duty and the pressure waiting for them. Then the prince named the decision. The Wales Succession Protection Decree was a royal order protecting the line of inheritance and the children being prepared for it. From that moment, Camilla could no longer approve, delay, revise, or influence decisions involving the children, royal education, ceremonial inheritance, or preparations for the next reign. Camilla first treated the words as a threat made in anger. She watched William as though he would soften once Charles intervened. But the future king placed the decree before his father and explained that crown legal advisors had reviewed it. Her confidence broke. This was not a family warning. It was a boundary written to survive emotion. Charles looked at the paper, then at his wife, then at his eldest son. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. William saw the conflict. The monarch wanted to protect Camilla, yet he understood the direct line, the sequence through which the throne passes from sovereign to heir, could not be reshaped by private influence. Anne ended the silence. Through a documented account prepared for the meeting, she confirmed that William had assembled records of postponed briefings, altered guest lists, disputed ceremonial roles, and recommendations concerning the children. He had not acted overnight. He had been watching and waiting. Camilla demanded to know which action had pushed him this far. William turned the decree toward her. From this moment, the future crown will no longer require your permission. She gripped the table. Charles removed his glasses and stared at one marked page in the evidence file. Whatever he read changed his face. Before that hidden incident could be exposed, the histories of the three people around the table would have to collide, and each had far more to lose than royal influence. To the outside world, this was a struggle over royal authority. Inside the family, it was far more personal. William saw a boundary being crossed around his children. Camilla saw decades of acceptance collapsing in a single sentence. Charles saw the two people closest to him standing on opposite sides of the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. The decree was written in formal language, but its deepest consequences were painfully human. William understood that his position as heir was no longer only about waiting for the throne. The Prince of Wales, the title traditionally held by the person expected to become the next monarch, was also a father responsible for protecting George, Charlotte, and Louis from pressures they were still too young to understand. He feared that private rivalries could shape how they viewed duty, family, and even themselves. Camilla carried a different fear. She had spent years fighting to be accepted inside the royal household, and every meeting, briefing, and ceremonial role had become proof that she was no longer standing at the edge. The queen consort, the monarch's spouse, who supports the sovereign without inheriting his constitutional authority, saw William's decree as more than a restriction. To her, it threatened to erase the legitimacy she believed she had finally earned. William could not ignore the past. Catherine had repeatedly urged him to remain calm, but she had also warned that silence could become permission. The princess understood how quickly influence around children could turn into control, especially when questions of their late grandmother's legacy and future royal duties were involved. She reminded him that George, Charlotte, and Louis needed guidance, not competing loyalties. Camilla found Charles alone after the meeting paused. She stood beside the closed window and asked, "Did you know he was going to do this?" The king hesitated. That delay wounded her more deeply than any answer. She told him that William had not merely reduced her role. He had declared that she could not be trusted near the monarchy's future. Charles finally admitted that he had approved several advisory responsibilities without defining their limits in writing. He had wanted his wife to feel secure. Instead, the monarch had created a gray area she slowly began to treat as permanent authority. Anne later confronted her brother through a documented account prepared by palace officers. She explained that repeated requests for clarity had been delayed because no one wanted to upset him. The crown, she warned, could not operate through emotional promises. Then Catherine quietly told Anne what had triggered everything. George had been summoned to a private ceremonial rehearsal without either parent's approval. The decree had not started the crisis. That hidden rehearsal had, and it had transformed suspicion into certainty. Every royal crisis has one moment that appears small, until the truth surrounding it is revealed. In this case, it began with a rehearsal hidden behind an ordinary calendar entry. Prince George was told he would receive a brief introduction to future ceremonial duties. William and Catherine were not invited. No public announcement was planned. But when the young prince entered the room, he discovered that Camilla had arranged something far more significant. A rehearsal built around authority she had never been formally granted. Palace rehearsals normally move through a strict chain of approval. A royal household is the private office that manages a senior family member's duties, staff, and official schedule, and any event involving George's future role would usually require permission from both his parents. That protection mattered because the boy was not simply attending a ceremony. He was being introduced to responsibilities tied directly to the throne. Camilla had already argued that the Wales children needed greater exposure to crown tradition. She told Charles during a recorded private conversation that quiet preparation would spare them the pressure of learning under public scrutiny. The queen consort presented herself as an experienced guide, someone who could make ancient customs feel less frightening. Yet she never told William how far that guidance would go. George entered what staff called the Crimson Chamber Rehearsal, a private practice session named after the room where ceremonial instructions were given. Camilla placed a ceremonial mantle beside him, a formal robe used to represent rank and royal duty, and told him to practice receiving senior courtiers as the future sovereign. She spoke calmly. The child listened, but neither Catherine nor William knew he was there. Then the tone changed. Camilla told George that some responsibilities should remain between him, the king, and the queen. The young prince carried those words home with him. Catherine noticed his unease and knelt beside him, asking exactly what had happened. When he repeated, "You must learn which things cannot be shared," her face hardened. She called William immediately. William returned to the rehearsal room after it had emptied. He found the mantle, a revised order of precedence, and George's handwritten name placed above several senior relatives. The order of precedence is the formal ranking that decides who stands, enters, or is recognized before others during royal events. Seeing his son's name moved without parental approval convinced the prince that this was not harmless practice. A courtier later admitted through a documented statement that Camilla had ordered the rehearsal removed from the Wales household's daily briefing. She also demanded it be called family preparation instead of succession training. William confronted Charles that night. He expected outrage. Instead, the king said Camilla had only been trying to help. That answer ended the debate. William was no longer asking whether a boundary had been crossed. He was preparing to force Camilla to admit it. When the meeting resumed, titles no longer protected anyone. William did not raise his voice, yet every sentence struck with the force of a public accusation. Camilla refused to retreat, insisting that she had acted for the crown, not against the Wales family. Charles sat between them, visibly torn. Then the prince asked one question that changed the atmosphere completely. Why had George been told to keep the rehearsal secret from his own mother and father? William laid out the full timeline. He named the private invitation, the altered diary entry, the ceremonial mantle, the revised precedence list, and George's shaken conversation with Catherine afterward. The order of precedence, the formal ranking that decides who enters, stands, or is recognized before others at royal events, had been changed without the Wales household's approval. That mattered because it did not simply prepare a child for duty. It placed him inside a future chain of authority without his parents beside him. Camilla answered with controlled anger. She argued that informal royal training had always taken place behind closed doors, and that George needed confidence before public duty overwhelmed him. The Queen Consort insisted she had tried to protect the boy from pressure, not pull him away from William and Catherine. She called the rehearsal an act of guidance. William did not move. Teaching duty, he told her, was not the offense. Breaking trust was. The future king said no member of the family had the right to make George believe that loyalty to the crown required secrecy from his parents. His voice remained quiet, but the meaning was brutal. Camilla had crossed from influence into control. Camilla pushed her chair back and stood. She accused William of waiting for an excuse to diminish her, and said he had never truly accepted her authority. Her voice broke as she reminded Charles that he had placed a crown beside her, yet his son still treated her like a permanent intruder. Anne ended the argument by producing a documented instruction sent to the courtier overseeing the rehearsal. No advance circulation to the Wales office. The Princess Royal, the monarch's sister, known for carrying senior duties without standing in the direct line, read the wording aloud. Camilla recognized it immediately. Charles finally turned toward his wife. He asked whether she had personally approved the secrecy instruction. Camilla did not deny it. She admitted she feared William would cancel the rehearsal before understanding its value. Then the prince delivered the final blow. The decree was not punishment for one mistake. It was protection against a hidden structure of influence growing around Charles. "Respect cannot include surrendering my children," William said. Charles turned away. But the confrontation was only beginning, because behind the anger stood a deeper constitutional reality even the king could not safely ignore. The crown carries enormous symbolic power, but even a monarch cannot transfer every authority through affection. Charles had given Camilla access, confidence, and influence because he trusted her completely. Yet William's advisors had uncovered a crucial distinction. The Queen could support the sovereign, but she could not independently direct the preparation of the next sovereign. In trying to protect his wife's place, Charles had allowed personal loyalty to blur the limits of constitutional responsibility. William's decree rested on a simple principle. As direct heir and father of the next generation, the prince held authority over his children's education, household access, ceremonial preparation, and future constitutional duties. A direct heir is the person first in line to inherit the throne, and that role carried responsibilities no private advisor could quietly replace. George, Charlotte, and Louis were not pieces in a palace struggle. They were children whose trust had to remain with their parents. Charles still had the power to challenge the decree. He was the reigning sovereign, the monarch who held final authority over the royal household. But rejecting William's decision would create a dangerous message. It would place Camilla's informal influence above the parental rights of the heir and above the direct line through which the crown would continue. Charles felt the trap closing. Supporting his son seemed like betrayal. Defending his wife seemed like surrendering the future. The king had spent years trying to make Camilla feel secure, and now every act of protection appeared to have helped create the crisis standing before him. Later, Charles sat alone with his private secretary and read the decree twice. He touched Camilla's name inside the restriction clause, removed his glasses, and admitted that he had never wanted her to feel pushed outside the family again. The restriction clause was the part of the decree that clearly listed which powers she could no longer use. Seeing those limits written in cold language made the decision painfully real. The private secretary answered through a documented briefing prepared for the monarch. He explained that the problem was not Camilla's title. It was the absence of boundaries. Several household offices had begun treating her personal preferences as commands carrying the king's authority. William had also secured Anne's support, and Catherine's written account of the rehearsal. If Charles blocked the decree, the conflict could leave the family room and become a formal dispute over household governance, the system deciding how royal offices use power and follow instructions. 2 folders rested before the king. One read, "Approve." The other read, "Challenge." Charles reached toward the second, stopped, and slowly pulled his hand back. That hesitation became an answer. By morning, Camilla would discover how quickly silence at the top could close doors across the palace. The decree did not remove Camilla's crown, title, or marriage. It did something more precise, and, to her, more painful. One by one, the channels through which she had influenced the future monarchy were closed. Briefing folders stopped arriving. Rehearsal schedules were redirected. Meetings involving the Wales children disappeared from her calendar. There was no dramatic announcement inside the palace. There was only the quiet machinery of authority moving away from her desk. Palace officials received new instructions before breakfast. Every matter involving George, Charlotte, Louis, succession education, future coronation planning, and inherited ceremonial objects would now pass through the Wales household. That household was the private office managing William, Catherine, and their children's duties, staff, and schedules. The change mattered because it cut off every route through which private influence could reach the next generation without parental approval. Camilla remained queen and continued standing beside Charles in public. She would still attend ceremonies, support charities, and carry out engagements in the monarch's name. But the private planning sessions shaping the next reign were gone. Her title remained untouched. Her reach did not. Camilla entered her morning sitting room and immediately noticed the empty shelf. The red succession briefing box had arrived there every day, carrying confidential papers about future royal planning. She asked an aide whether it was late. The woman hesitated before explaining that the box had been permanently reassigned to William's office. The Queen watched as the aide removed the empty stand that had held it. After the door closed, she remained seated beside the bare space. For the first time, the decree felt permanent. Camilla telephoned Charles at once. She expected him to stop the implementation before it spread further. The king listened, then told her he could not defend the secrecy surrounding George's rehearsal. She heard more than disagreement in those words. She heard abandonment. William moved quickly. He ordered an audit, a formal review of past decisions and instructions, covering every message issued under Camilla's name. The review uncovered 3 more occasions when the Wales office had been excluded from discussions about the children's future ceremonial roles. Catherine received the most painful finding through a documented palace report. Charlotte's future access to inherited royal heirlooms had been discussed without her mother's knowledge. The princess immediately understood that the rehearsal had not been an isolated mistake. A parallel structure of influence had been growing in silence. Camilla prepared to confront William again, but Charles stopped her before she reached the meeting room. He told her there would be no advisors, no secretaries, and no constitutional language. The next conversation would be only family. Stripped of official arguments, Charles and William would finally speak as father and son, and that private exchange would decide whether the family fractured or found one last path forward. For the first time since the crisis began, there were no lawyers, courtiers, or carefully arranged chairs between them. Charles asked William to meet him alone. The king did not begin by defending Camilla. The prince did not begin by repeating the decree. For several painful seconds, they simply faced one another as father and son. 2 men shaped by the same institution, yet carrying very different memories of what happens when family pain is hidden behind royal silence. Charles invited his son into the private library after midnight and left the decree outside the room. That choice mattered. The document had become the formal source of their conflict, but the real wound was deeper than legal language. It concerned trust, childhood, and the fear that the next generation might inherit the same silence that had damaged the one before it. William spoke first. He explained that his deepest fear was not Camilla alone. It was the creation of a system where George might believe becoming king required secrecy from his parents. The future sovereign was the person expected one day to inherit the throne, but William refused to accept that duty must begin by teaching a child emotional distance. Charles listened without interrupting. Then he admitted that he had minimized the Crimson Chamber rehearsal because acknowledging its seriousness would force him to confront how much authority Camilla had been allowed to use in his name. The king had mistaken reassurance for permission and loyalty for oversight. William answered with painful honesty. He told his father that protecting Camilla from rejection could not require Catherine to feel powerless inside her own family. The princess had already watched private influence reach her children without consent. The comparison struck Charles hard because it echoed wounds he had spent years trying not to name. Charles finally revealed the truth through a recorded private conversation preserved by his secretary. He had never authorized the rehearsal and had not seen the secrecy instruction before the emergency meeting. He now understood that William's intervention had stopped one hidden practice from becoming accepted custom. The turning point came quietly. Charles agreed to endorse the decree within the household, giving it the monarch's formal support. Yet he asked his son not to treat Camilla's mistake as proof that her entire place beside him was false. William accepted the difference. He would protect George, Charlotte, Louis, and the succession, without demanding the queen consort's removal. Charles extended his hand across the table. William hesitated, then took it. "Your children should never have been placed in that position," the king said. "The agreement saved the family from complete rupture." But by sunrise, the palace could no longer contain the decree, or the unmistakable shift it had created. By morning, the decree had escaped the guarded rooms of the palace and entered public life. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled programming. Commentators argued over whether William had protected the monarchy or openly overruled its reigning queen. Yet one image captured the story more powerfully than any debate. The Prince of Wales arriving at Buckingham Palace with George beside him, while Camilla's car departed through a separate gate without stopping. The palace released a carefully worded statement before noon. It confirmed that all succession preparation involving George, Charlotte, and Louis would now be managed exclusively by William and Catherine, with Charles's approval. Succession preparation meant the private training, education, and ceremonial planning designed to prepare future heirs for royal duty. The wording sounded calm, but its meaning was impossible to miss. William had gained formal control over the future line. Camilla had lost the private access that once allowed her to shape discussions before the Wales household even knew they were happening. The statement did not criticize her directly, yet every sentence narrowed her reach. Charles's supporters reacted with alarm. Some believed the king had exposed weakness by allowing his son to force such a major change. Others saw something harder and more honorable. The monarch had accepted personal pain to protect long-term stability, even when that decision left his wife isolated. Camilla watched the coverage alone. One broadcaster described the decree as the moment the future king stopped asking for space and began defining the boundaries of his reign. The queen consort stared at the screen for several seconds, then switched it off before the discussion ended. She had kept her title. But the country now understood that her authority had limits. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered beneath a newspaper billboard, carrying the headline, "William draws the crown line." The front page showed the prince entering the palace, while Charles stood behind a window, and Camilla's vehicle moved away from the courtyard. The image turned a private family struggle into a national symbol. Then William's car reached the gates. The crowd fell silent as George stepped out beside his father. The future king placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder before they entered together. That single gesture explained why he had fought so hard. Anne faced questions during an afternoon engagement. Through a recorded exchange with reporters, she said, "The line of duty is clear, and clarity protects everyone." Her words confirmed what the palace statement had avoided saying directly. The decree would not be reversed. Now every eye turned toward the family's next joint appearance. Charles, William, and Camilla would have to stand together without explaining the crisis, and reveal whether the monarchy had survived what the world had just witnessed. The final answer did not arrive through another decree or confrontation. It came when Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, and their children appeared together for a crown service 3 days later. No one spoke publicly about the crisis. They did not need to. Charles entered as sovereign. Camilla stood beside her husband. But George walked between his parents, and every decision concerning his future now rested exactly where William had demanded it should, with the family responsible for preparing him. The appearance settled one fear immediately. Camilla had not been expelled, stripped of her title, or separated from Charles. The crown service, a formal royal ceremony marking duty, continuity, and national responsibility, showed that the marriage had survived. Yet the decree had also created a line that could no longer be crossed. William's authority over George, Charlotte, Louis, and their future preparation was now written, accepted, and protected. Camilla approached William before the service, while Charles was elsewhere. She admitted in a private recorded conversation that arranging George's rehearsal in secret had been wrong. The Queen Consort still insisted that she had wanted to help the boy understand his destiny, not divide him from his parents. But her voice carried none of the certainty she had shown before. William listened without interrupting. Then the prince accepted the apology, but refused to weaken the decree. He told her that intentions could not erase boundaries, and trust would return only through actions that respected Catherine and the children. Camilla understood the meaning. Forgiveness was possible. Control was not. Charles made the decision final. He signed the household endorsement of the Wales Succession Protection Decree, the formal approval confirming that every royal office must follow its restrictions. The king's signature proved that he had chosen constitutional clarity over personal avoidance. More painfully, it confirmed that William had been right to defend the next generation. The monarch passed the pen toward his son. William did not add another signature. He simply closed the folder. Across the room, Camilla gave a restrained nod, and Catherine took George's hand before the family moved forward together. The consequences were now permanent. Camilla remained queen beside Charles and retained influence within his reign, but that influence ended at the boundary of William's future monarchy. She could no longer shape succession planning through private access, hidden instructions, or unrecorded decisions. William's victory was not the defeat of his father or the humiliation of a woman. It restored one principle. The crown's future could not be built through secrecy, emotional pressure, or blurred authority. It had to rest on trust, accountability, and the protection of the children who would one day carry it. The confrontation ended with no exile, no shattered crown, and no public revenge. William drew the boundary, Charles accepted it, and Camilla respected it. The monarchy chose a clearer, safer future, and the matter was finished. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.